With Remembrance Day around the corner, Canada is getting pretty emotional around certain topics. But today marks a day of something that is extremely important. The murder from a terrorist scumbag which took the life of Corporal Nathan Cirillo right in Canada's capital in Ottawa. This marks the 10-year anniversary of that absolute atrocious acts that happened in Ottawa, where an armed gunman went to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier right outside of Parliament Hill, shot and killed a guard who was on duty there, Corporal Nathan Cirillo, and then went into Parliament Hill and tried to continue some form of a spree. So the Prime Minister obviously addressed this today. So did Pierre Poilievre. And I certainly don't want to politicize it. So I'm going to put those at the end of this video. But this has got me choked up today. I did not start off my stream question period how I normally do. I got pretty choked up, and I did as well at the end of the stream. Wow, I did not think I was going to start off by getting pretty emotional. So just to do my best to kind of make a separation between question period, talking about policies, just the meat and potatoes of what happened in question period, I'm going to start the video off by playing question period right now. And then towards the later half, we're going to look at Justin Trudeau's speech and Pierre Poilievre's speech. So if you just want to skip ahead to those, that's fine. I don't blame you. Maybe somebody down below can be generous enough to provide a timestamp. But if you want to stick around for the full video, I highly recommend that you do. Here are the clips from today. Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, soon to be next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Speaker, we now learn there are about 40 Liberal MPs that believe that this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost, crime, and corruption. But there's this strange rule in the Liberal caucus that you need to have permission from the Prime Minister to speak at the microphone. So a Liberal MP wanted to get up and say quadrupling the carbon tax is a bad idea, or doubling housing costs is making people homeless. They can't do it. Will the Prime Minister lift the gag so his Liberal MPs can say to his face that he's not worth the crime, the cost, and the corruption?
There he goes, man.
Once again in English, none of these questions have to deal with the administration of government, but I see
oh my God.
Order. I see that the Prime Minister is rising to his feet. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that the Conservative leader is confusing rules that apply within his Conservative caucus to rules that we have in the Liberal Party. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, we see at which point the Conservative leader is simply focused on playing politics and gaining power. That's why he wants to talk about things that are not having to do with delivering for Canadians. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that close to 1 million Canadians will be receiving dental care because of our Canadian dental program that he says doesn't even exist and that he's voted against every step of the way.
May I ask the honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot to please not take the microphone when the speaker is up on his feet or when other speakers who have been recognized by the speaker is taking the floor. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to have to bring up this terrible rule. It's just that Liberal backbench MPs are coming and talking to all of us to say they're not allowed to speak to him. And they're wondering if I could perhaps pose some questions on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, I guess they can't get anywhere with the current Prime Minister, so they'd rather talk to the future common sense Conservative.
There you go.
Instead of silencing his own MPs, will he let them get up to the mic tomorrow to tell him that he's not worth the cost, crime, and corruption?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is he can't administer the government because he's too busy fighting for his job after 9 years Even if his MPs know it. He broke immigration, he doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, doubled crime, doubled the cost of living in a home. He wants to quadruple the carbon tax that's already forced 2 million people to a food bank, 1 in 4 kids to hunger, 25% of Canadians to poverty. Canadian food prices up 36% faster than in the States. StatsCan says we have the biggest gap between rich and poor in our recorded history. His MPs know that he's broke the country. Will they call a carbon tax election so we can fix it?
There you go. Put some W's in the chat. I'll put some W's down for our boy Pierre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, like all of us in this House, know that Canadians are facing challenging times. His solution, however, is to offer them cuts, is to offer them no programs that they can rely on.
More money in our pockets.
Like dental care and pharmacare and investments in a green economy that is going to create jobs and careers long into the future. He wants to harm Canadians where we're focusing on delivering for them. He wants cuts to programs and services while we're busy investing in Canadians and their futures. That's the choice Canadians get to make.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of the Liberal NDP government, taxes up, costs up, crimes up, time's up. The Parliamentary Budgeting Officer confirmed what Canadians already know. This incompetent finance minister can't do math. She's going to blow through her own deficit this year by $7 billion. That's higher taxes and lower standards of living. Wow. 1 in 4 Canadians are already skipping meals, and this Liberal-made misery is only going to get worse. Why not call a carbon tax election now so Conservatives can fix the budget?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to hear the Conservatives talk about the PBO, because just
they're dropping the
PBO
Bank of Canada announcement tomorrow
on the sustainability of the federal finances. And I'm going to quote what the PBO said, quote, "Current fiscal policy at the federal level is sustainable over the long term. In fact, according to the PBO, the federal government could even, quote, permanently increase spending by 1.5% of GDP. The only fiscal threat to Canada is Conservatives, who would cut health care, child care, national school fees."
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
That PhD in wackonomics has no clue. This incompetent finance minister, not knowing how to do math.
Put some W's in the chat. He's going to get kicked out for saying that. A PhD in wackonomics? Shoot, man, that's funny.
Colleagues, try to encourage as much freedom as possible in terms of the way people express themselves here. I'm going to ask honourable members. To, as much as possible, refrain from using language which is directed at a particular member and is considered
unparliamentary,
insulting to those members. So I'm going to encourage all members, and I've spoken about this in a previous ruling. I'm going to ask the honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn to start his question again, but to rephrase his question so that he doesn't.
Nah, do it again. Do it again. Do it again.
Sounds like liberal wackonomics, and this incompetent finance minister not knowing how to do math ensured 50% of Canadians can't afford basic necessities like food. She'll give cushy contracts to rich liberal insiders while telling the 2 million Canadians she sent into a food bank they can solve their liberal-made misery by cancelling their Disney+. She knows higher deficits lead to higher taxes and lower standards of living. She just doesn't care. Why not call a carbon tax election now so Canadians can fire these economic arsonists?
Yeah, buddy! Show your support down in the live chat. That's phenomenal. He's going to get a warning.
Come back to members on this matter, but I'm going to encourage all...
Yeah, they're going to raise a point of order after.
I'm going to encourage all members to please...
Oh, that's good.
...their counsel when they're not recognized by the chair. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your remonstrations. But I have
shut
to tell
up.
you, speaking for myself, puerile playground insults from the maple syrup mega don't bother me.
How is that any better? Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order. Point of order. That's discrimination. Now this is where the fun begins. I say to you, well, my daughter says to me when I tell her to clean up her toys. That's my answer to this.
This is precisely the reason why we should be very mindful of our language, because things will be said on all sides which is going to be disturbing to the order of the House. I'm going to come back to this matter, and I'm going to ask the Deputy Prime Minister to start her question again without using those words. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I can handle it. But what makes me really mad, what I can't handle, is seeing crocodile tears from these Conservatives. The only time they notice vulnerable Canadians is for a partisan photo op. And
Photo op?
No, they don't care because they are opposed to a national school food program that is feeding 400,000.
Didn't she just solve Indigenous poverty by feeding one school of kids Bannock yesterday?
Canadians, they just care about themselves.
I fed kids Bannock. Problem solved.
The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs up, crime's up, and you know what? Time is up. This costly NDP Liberal coalition has doubled the cost of housing, and the majority of Canadians are unable to keep up with their grocery needs. Canadians have had enough. But the NDP Liberal coalition only wants to drive up costs by quadrupling their carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister finally call a carbon tax election so Conservatives can offer Canadians some relief?
There you go.
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, under the Conservative leader, slogans are up, rhymes are up, and parroting talking points so you get a shiny gold star and caucus seems to be up. I cannot imagine diminishing myself when I have the opportunity to
makes fun of Conservatives and does the exact same thing.
We can put forward on the floor of the House of Commons. If they care about helping people, why don't they actually support the policies that help build homes for people who can't afford them? Why don't they actually help advance policies that let families put food on the table, whether that is childcare, a middle-class tax cut, or the Canada Child Benefit? Every time we put measures forward to help Canadians, they vote against it and stand up with this nonsense.
Where's the million people that you lost? Give me a break.
The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you the Canadians that are lined up at food banks aren't buying their pathetic rhetoric. The parliamentary budget officer has already confirmed once again that the carbon tax is costing Canadians more than they receive in rebates. And for families in Saskatchewan, the quadrupled carbon tax is $2,000. Will the Prime Minister finally give Canadians the carbon tax election that they so desperately need?
Look at that. Yeah, throw some W's. You know what? Let's keep the momentum.
Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me provide a few facts to the honourable member. Fact, the PBO confirmed that the vast majority of Canadians get more money back than they pay. Fact, over 300 economists say carbon pricing is the best way to reduce emissions that is best for the economy. Fact, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said her family gets more money back with the carbon rebate. Fact, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said he looked at all alternatives to the carbon price and they were all too expensive. We are reducing emissions while we are addressing affordability. On that side of the House, they have no plan to address climate change. They are actively denying the reality of climate change. They have no plan for the economy. Shame on you.
Wow. I'm surprised he was able to get through that without having a stroke.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs up, crimes up, and time is up. The Prime Minister's own parliamentary budget officer confirmed yet again that the carbon tax costs more to Canadians than they get back in rebates. When the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax, families in Alberta will pay nearly $2,000 more in carbon taxes. Will the NDP Liberals finally admit their tax is simply a scheme and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Economic
Mr.
Development.
Speaker, at the risk of correcting my honourable colleague from the other side, let me state very clearly, the PBO has indicated that 8 out of 10 Albertans get more money back from the Canada Carbon Rebate than they pay in carbon tax. And Mr. Speaker,
It's just so not correct.
take the word of Premier Danielle Smith, who said that not only did she get more money back because she lives in rural Alberta, she even got the 20% top-up. Sorry, my colleague, that's the fact.
Holy smokes.
I ask the Honourable Member from Miramichi Grand Lake not to take the floor unless he's recognized. The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster. Excuse me, from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians lined up at food banks really aren't buying that rhetoric. I'm sorry. Food bank usage is also up. Cold Lake Food Bank is the busiest it's ever been, with a 28% increase in usage over 2023, which itself saw an increase of 16% over 2022. The carbon tax is driving up the cost of groceries, gas, and heating, making things more difficult for families and food banks that are pushed to their limit. So the question's simple. Will the Prime Minister admit his carbon tax isn't working and call a carbon tax election?
I wonder what the other Randy thinks. You guys hear that?
Speaker, the numbers are in and the checks have already arrived. And in Alberta, a family of 4 gets $2,500 per year, which is more than they spend on the price on pollution, which is something the other side doesn't understand because, Mr. Speaker, they don't care if the planet burns. And, Mr. Speaker, let's go one step further. Why did that side vote against the Canada Child Benefit that gives $7,800 per kid in Alberta? Why did they vote against childcare? Why do they vote against supports for workers? They care about themselves, not about Canadians. We're on the side of Canadians each and every day.
The Honourable Member from Regina Leuven.
That much hot air to run a couple windmills, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of these
Yeah, that was a good one.
taxes are up, costs up, crime is up, and time is up. The parliamentary budget officer once again confirmed that Canadians pay much more and cost more than they get back in rebates. In Saskatchewan, after these guys quadruple the carbon tax, it's going to cost a family $2,000. That's $2,000 a year, Mr. Speaker. My question is, when will these Liberals call carbon tax elections so Canadians can have their say at the ballot box?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, it's really difficult to take any of this rhetoric seriously. When I was first elected 9 years ago, that party used to send checks to millionaires to help them with the cost of raising their families. That presented 2 questions. Millionaires would ask me in my riding, why am I getting this money? And people of lower income would ask me in my riding, why is it getting taxed back? What we did is we created a Canada Child Benefit that is tax-free and means tested. What we've also done is establish a national school food program. If you're really serious about addressing child poverty and family poverty, why don't you get on board?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 10 years ago today, Canada was in shock. Our capital, the centre of Canadian democracy, was the target of a cowardly and shameful terrorist attack aimed at both the National War Memorial and Parliament Hill. Corporal Nathan Cirillo, standing sentry at the tomb of the unknown soldier, was killed, and several others were injured.
It was unfortunately not the only tragic event that struck Canada that very week. 2 days before, Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent was killed in an attack in Saint-Jean-de-Richelieu in Quebec. Today, I ask my colleagues, members of this House and Canadians to join me when we honour these 2 devoted members of the Canadian Armed Forces and offer our condolences to their families, to their well-being, and to members of the armed forces.
Never forget this tragedy and the victims who were targeted because of their commitment to their country and to Canadians. It is a reminder of the sacrifices that members of the Canadian Armed Forces made and continue to make to keep all of us safe. Sacrifices that are, in fact, symbolized by the National War Memorial, whether during operations around the globe, while responding to natural disasters here at home, or even in our very capital. Service members put their lives at risk every single day so that we can all live in a peaceful, safe, and democratic society. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the paramedics, police officers, and those of the Parliamentary Protective Services who rushed towards danger to protect Canadians. I'm thinking notably of Constable Samuel Song, who was shot and injured while doing so, and who is with us today.
They should show him up in the gallery instead of showing Trudeau, but
I know that I'm not the only one who remains inspired by the incredible courage that Sam showed that day. When remembering these events, I also think of former Sergeant-at-Arms Kevin Vickers, who, by acting decisively, was then able to bring the attack to an end. I think all Canadians should be proud of their Parliamentary Protective Service. They should also be proud of the courage of their fellow Canadians, passers-by who, motivated by their compassion, acted to help and held Corporal Nathan Cirillo in their arms during his final moments. Cette solidarité
The solidarity shown by Canadians during this tragic event is also a reminder that those who seek to attack us will fail.
Yeah.
Canada's response is always the same. We come out of it closer and stronger. We are even more devoted after any attack to the values of our country: freedom, peace, and openness. Canadians will always choose to reject hate, choose to reject violence.
Let us take the time to mourn Corporal Nathan Cirillo and Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent and remember who they were: proud, devoted, selfless, and brave patriots. As we approach Remembrance Day, let us think of all the sacrifices made by members of our Canadian Armed Forces, past and present, and let us take every opportunity to thank them for all that they do for each and every one of us. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Oh my goodness. Someone's phone.
Give it here. Rifle safety. I think
He's watching a rifle safety video.
10 years ago, we witnessed an attack on democracy. The attack began on the 20th of October 2014 in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu with the murder of a courageous soldier, Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent. Mr. Vincent served his country. He donned the Canadian uniform. He had a family. He had friends who adored him, but who lost him on that day. 2 days later, there was another attack, here on Parliament Hill. But perhaps even worse, at the Cenotaph.
Attack of October 22nd, 2014 took the life of a courageous Canadian, Corporal Nathan Cirillo. standing on guard for those who had fallen, standing on guard for our country. There he was at the tomb of the unknown soldier, ambushed and shot, lying bleeding in the arms of a half a dozen courageous Ottawa residents who held him and told him, "You are so loved." Moments later, the life would drain out of his body. Some might have looked at him and said he was an ordinary Canadian. Certainly, when I saw the picture of him a few days later in the newspaper, his muscles bulging after a trip to the gym, I thought he could have been like any young Canadian. But he wasn't. He wasn't ordinary at all. He was extraordinary, as are every single one of the men and women who put on the uniform of our forces. The terrorist who then made his way to Parliament Hill in a carjacked vehicle, bursted through the front door. I remember being in the caucus meeting of the then Conservative government and hearing a large crunching sound, which turned out, I learned later, to be the repetitive echo of a single gunshot bouncing off the oval-shaped ceiling of the rotunda back down onto the marble floors. That was the first shot inside of Parliament, and it was a shot that bore a wound. But it could have been so much worse. You see, when this terrorist entered, he planned to cause maximum carnage, but there was someone waiting for him. One of our courageous guards, Samirin's son, saw the gun, grabbed the assailant, pushed the gun downward, and took a bullet in the ankle, giving his compatriots enough warning time to draw their own weapons and take cover behind the large limestone pillars that hold Parliament up. Had he not done that, it is almost certain that the gunman would have taken more lives. We now, later, we didn't know about the story of Samirin's son because he didn't tell anyone. Instead, he quietly hobbled out of the building and towards the then abandoned hijacked vehicle to see if there were any other terrorists. There may well have been other gunmen at that point taking aim at him, but he fearlessly continued his work. He didn't tell anyone what he did no interviews, and the only quote I can find of him from that day was, "I'll survive." He got into an ambulance and made his way to the hospital and quietly went back home to recover with his family. That is the calm, humble, courageous character that embodies the best of Canada. Samirin's son is Canada's son.
Getting a little choked up.
Proceed through the Hall of Honor. I remember the sounds of those firecracker sounds going off. We didn't know at the time that those were gunshots fired by our security forces, thank God, bringing the terrorist to the ground and ultimately to his deserved fate. I want to thank each and every one of our security members who fought so hard to protect us while putting their lives at risk on that day. The first responders who arrived quickly on the scene to ensure that, to minimize the damage done and the lives lost. The military members, the RCMP, and countless others who protected us all and stood with us in that day. And I want to thank all parliamentarians who showed courage and camaraderie in coming together in responding to defend this institution of Parliament and to grieve the loss of those who had defended us. What we learned on that day, Mr. Speaker, is that if we can see over the horizon, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants. Giants like Corporal Sorello, like Patrice Vincent, like Samirin's son, and like the countless other heroes that defended us on that day. May we remember today, every day, of the precious gift that is our parliamentary democracy and the even more precious gift that are those who defend it. Thank you.
Wow. Spoken from the heart. No piece of papers. That was incredible.